There's a massive change coming August 17th that is going to affect everyone who's trying to buy or sell real estate here in Idaho and actually across the entire country. I'm talking about the NAR settlement. You might have heard about it on the news. Now, the changes that are coming could mean the difference between you being able to afford the house you want or having to settle for something less. Now, as I'm talking, you might be tempted to yell at your screen, "This guy's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's talking about. I've been reading the news, I know what's going on." But I promise you there's been so much misinformation put out by this, it's kind of staggering. So hopefully by the end of this video, you'll understand what changes are taking place and how that's gonna affect you. And if you still feel like leaving an angry, bitter message on the comment section, you feel free, but at least get through the whole video before you do that. Let's go. Hey, welcome to another episode of Living Life in North Idaho. My name is Trent, and on this channel, we talk about what it's like living, eating, working, playing, and buying real estate here in Idaho. If that's of interest to you, go ahead and tap the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so every time I come out with a new video, you're getting notified. So let's dive into this NAR settlement and discuss how these changes are going to affect you as a buyer and a seller. To help break this down, we're going to briefly discuss how real estate has worked over the past century and what brought about these lawsuits. Then we'll dive into the changes they want to implement and how it's going to affect you. And lastly, we'll talk about what the process will now look like and how you as the consumer have a voice and what you can do to get that voice heard if you don't agree with these changes. So let's get started. So in this lawsuit, the claim was that sellers were not properly informed by their agents that the listing commission was negotiable, as some agents were stating that it was standard to pay the listing agent 3% and the buyer's agent 3% for bringing them a buyer, and that not paying this fee was actually going to hurt their chances of selling their house. So in March of this year, the NAR settled for $418 million, as not settling could have brought about antitrust charges, which would have increased the fines to $5 billion, essentially destroying the Realtors Association. And as part of the settlement, they agreed to make significant changes to how the commissions are handled, which we're going to talk about in a second. So those are the facts around the lawsuit. But before I dive into the changes that are going to be implemented, we need to look at how real estate has been done for over a century so you understand how these changes are going to affect you. So for the past 100 years, if a homeowner wants to sell their house, they have two options. They can either put a for sale sign in the yard and take care of every aspect of getting that home sold, or they can hire a licensed real estate agent who is going to take care of the entire transaction. They're going to do things like pricing the property, preparing the home for sale, marketing the property, managing inquiries and showings, negotiating offers, handling contracts and paperwork, coordinating inspections and appraisals, managing the closing process, providing market insight updates, and offering continued support. Now, it might not seem like a super long list, but there's a lot of detail that goes into each one of those tasks. And for those of us with full-time jobs who are looking at buying a new house, packing up everything we own, and managing your life and trying to keep things on the rail, trying to sell your largest asset yourself is oftentimes not worth it. It's just better to hire a professional who is fully focused on helping you with that task. But back to that list. Did you notice anything that was missing that was kind of a big deal? Bringing a buyer. Now, every listing agent would love to bring a buyer, but the fact is, it doesn't matter how long you've been in this industry, your list of buyers that you're actively working with and might be interested in your listing is pretty small. You need the rest of the marketplace to help bring you a buyer to get that home sold in a decent amount of time and for the most money possible. So in comes the buyer's agent. Now, it's important to note, buyer's agents were not always called buyer's agents. They used to be called sub-agents because they actually worked for the seller. The seller would pay the listing agent to get it all marketed, get it all ready, handle the negotiations, that big long list I showed you, and then the sub-agent was out there networking and meeting buyers and bringing buyers to the house to help get it sold for the best price. And the sub-agent would get compensated by the listing agent's brokerage. Oftentimes they would just split the commission in half if you could bring them a buyer. But back in the 90s, buyers caught wind of this and they went, hang on a second, so this agent isn't representing our best interest, they're actually looking out for the seller? Well, that's not cool, we need representation. Because remember, selling a house is only so risky. As long as you're honest, there's really not that much risk. But buying a house, that list of things that they need to do to make sure that they're not gonna step in it is triple the length of listing a home. Because remember, you buy the wrong house in the wrong location, it can be extremely hard to fix that house. Sometimes you can't, and sometimes it's really hard to sell. So people can really lose out quickly. So the sellers were like, you know what, if that's what you need to move forward and buy my house, that's fine. In fact, I'll cover the fee because I was gonna pay that agent anyway for bringing me a buyer. I might as well pay it to have them represent you because you're the one with the money and I wanna get my house sold. Now, just like the sellers, the buyers didn't have to have representation. They could go directly to the seller and say, hey, we don't have an agent representing us. We know you were gonna pay them, so why don't you just lower the price of the house for what you were gonna pay that agent and we can make a deal. And some sellers would go, great, that sounds perfect. But oftentimes buyers would look at all of the things that they were gonna have to do. Look up zoning laws, conditions, covenants, and restrictions. They would have to understand inspections and schedule inspections, open title, all of the things involved with buying a house. And they would go, no, thank you. We have full-time jobs too, so we need representation to help us through that process. And so the sellers would go, okay, fine, then I'll just pay them and I'm not gonna give you that discount. This is how it has worked for 111 years. Sellers have always had the option to sell the home themselves or work with an agent, and the fees have always been negotiable. But as the lawsuit claims, there were some agents that were making it seem like there was a standard rate that they had to pay, and if they didn't pay that rate, they were gonna have a really hard time selling their house. So now we have these changes that we have to implement. Let's talk about those. Real estate agents who use and list properties for sale on a multiple listing service, or MLS, will be required to enter into written agreements with buyers before touring a home. Those written agreements must include a specific and conspicuous disclosure of the amount or rate of compensation the real estate agent will receive or how this amount will be determined. So instead of it just being the amount that the seller was willing to compensate the buyer's agent, there now has to be a conversation with the buyer on how much the compensation will be, and the buyer has to agree to it. And the reason is because they might be the ones who have to cover it. Compensation that is objective and not open-ended. This means that it has to be an established amount. It can be a set dollar amount, a percentage, an hourly fee, or a flat fee. It just can't be open-ended based on whatever the seller is willing to pay. A term that prohibits the agent from receiving compensation for brokerage services from any source that exceeds the amount or rate agreed to in the agreement with the buyer, and a conspicuous statement that broker fees and commissions are fully negotiable and not set by law. So what that means is if an agent negotiates 2% with their buyer for their services, but the seller's actually offering 3% on the house they're trying to buy, they do not get to change the amount to collect on that 3%. It has to stay at 2%. Now, if they set it at 3% and the seller's only offering 2.5%, then they can negotiate it down. They just can't negotiate up. And lastly, the MLS is no longer allowed to host the buyer's agent compensation on their website. Agents will need to discuss this off the MLS in an attempt to prevent agents from steering their clients away from sellers not willing to pay their compensation. So that's it. Those are the big changes that are taking place because of this settlement. Now, if you've been watching legacy media, you probably think that I'm full of it or just totally misinformed. I promise you I'm not. I've been reading what legacy media is putting out, and it's a lot of garbage. There's so much misinformation around this. It's really staggering because I've read through this and it's not what they're saying it is. But at the end of the day, there's still going to be a massive effect, and we're not totally sure how this will play out with the market. But here are the things that are really going to affect you and how this is going to change for you as a buyer. So normally you could just go find any licensed agent and they can start letting you into homes and you can start touring homes. And until you actually make an offer, you don't have to sign anything with them. You're not tied to them at all. Now you're gonna have to sign an agreement. Basically, that agreement says, this is what I offer for my services and this is how much I charge for it. Before you can view a home, even virtually, even if they want to do a video walkthrough, you still have to sign that. Open houses are different. You don't have to have representation to go view an open house, but everything else you will. This is gonna be a bit of a challenge for a lot of agents because they really weren't good at having that conversation about how much they deserve to be compensated, because a lot of agents were overcompensated. They weren't great at their jobs, and now this is gonna require them to have that conversation. The next big change is that buyers get to negotiate with their agents how much compensation they're gonna make. This is gonna get interesting because already in California, there's a couple of big companies that are opening up flat fee real estate services. I don't really understand how that's gonna work because every transaction is different. Sure, during the pandemic, you could make a few offers and boom, you got that client a house and it was super easy. That's why a lot of people got into it. Now, it's a lot more challenging. You could be making offer after offer. You could be looking for months for the right house. So how does a flat fee gonna cover those expenses? I really don't understand it. To me, I see this like big box stores. When I go to Home Depot and an associate comes up and asks me what I'm doing.
Hi there. Is there a project you're working on?
I know more than you.
All right.
I know they don't know what they're talking about. They're not there because they're super passionate. They're there because they need a job and they know some things about it. But at the end of the day, I'm the one who has to do all the research and make sure it gets done right. I feel like that's ultimately going to end up happening. And just like before, buyers and sellers do not have to work with an agent. They can go at it themselves. They can hire an attorney to help them or a flat fee service. They can do whatever they want. They can even go directly to the listing agent and work with them. But now you're under limited dual agency, which is actually illegal in some states, because ultimately that agent now cannot look after the best interest of either client. They're kind of like a mediator, which is a bit of a disservice to each party. But yeah, you can do whatever you want, just like you have always been able to do. So with that said, obviously things are gonna be changing after August 17th. We're gonna see a lot of mediocre and bad agents leave the industry, which I think is a great thing.
You're fired!
And we're gonna see some buyers that are going to be misinformed and they're gonna step out of the market until things change. That's not gonna be great. But I wanna say right now, nothing is definitive. You as the buyer, you're the one who has the money. So that means that you have a voice and you have the power. If you wanna negotiate the price down to help compensate your buyer's agent, you can do that. If you wanna negotiate with the seller that no, you guys need to be paying for my representation to protect me in this because I'm the one bringing all the money, you can definitely do that. There's gonna be some sellers that listen to legacy media and think, cool, I get to have my cake and eat it too. I don't think it's gonna work out super well for them because at the end of the day, how many buyers can afford the $500,000, $1 million house and afford to pay their buyer's agent? It's not a big number, so you're just limiting the market. But there's already sellers that are saying, no, I'm not buying into that. I'm just gonna offer compensation. That's how it's always worked. It's worked fine. I'm just gonna do that. So don't think that this is the end of the road for you because of these changes. There's always workarounds, and there's also ways of having your voice be heard. If you don't like these changes, if you don't agree to them, you're the consumer. Ultimately, these are there, they're saying to protect you. Sure, the attorneys are making hundreds of millions of dollars off of going after us, but it's for your protection. Now, if you don't agree with that, talk to your governor, talk to the Secretary of Commerce, get a hold of the people responsible for this and voice your opinion. If enough people speak up, then we can see some better changes than what they've proposed. Personally, a lot of people in the industry think that this has been slapped together. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. But we'll see how it plays out. Now, there are other videos you can check out if you are serious about getting moved to Idaho. And of course, reach out to me and my team, the phone number or email address listed below if you would like to get more information on living in Idaho, or if you'd like to get moved here. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, tap the notification bell. Until the next video, I'll see you later.